All right, ladies and gentlemen. So, just in case you didn't know from the very beginning, this is introduction to beekeeping. My name is Jasmine Padua Bowditch, aka the Bee Lady, as I'm known here at the Sunbury Gardens. And this is my fellow beekeeper partner in crime when it comes to dealing with the hive, Ravi. I always mess up your name. Sorry. Okay, just to reiterate with the acknowledgement of country. So Hachi village recognizes the rich Aboriginal heritage and acknowledges the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung, which includes the existing family members of the Gunan Wullumbala clan as the traditional custodians of this land. We embrace Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander living cultures as a vital part of Australia's identity and recognize, celebrate, and pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging. So just to give a little bit of introduction, as I mentioned earlier, my name is Jasmine Padua Bowditch. I've been an academic beekeeper for about 5 or 6 years. But this is the first time presenting a hive at the community gardens, so this was a very happy communal work with Fortunata to be able to get the hive here. The hive was established in December 2022, so it's only been here for about 4 or 5 months, but Freya, who we've named the queen of the colony, she's doing quite well, and with winter coming, we're getting ready for her to pack down and we get ready for the winter time. So our course summary is that we're going to go a little bit of history. We're going to talk about the different types of hives. We're common tools, which we have here on display, so everyone will get to touch, see, and possibly smell if you haven't already smelled the burnt smell coming forward. Then we have a little bit on life cycle, different types of inspections, how to do hive management, pest diseases, and with luck, the different methods of honey extraction, which we have one example going on here at the moment. All right. So first question I would like to pose to everyone is, who's new to beekeeping? Like, doesn't know any, oh wow, okay. Do we have any middle, like just starting beekeepers or like getting into maybe their first or second year? Any experience? Okay, cool. All right, very good. All right, so we got a nice, we got a good section of absolute beginners, and then we have our experienced veterans. Very nice. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the history. The history is very extensive. We're talking about a skill that has been going through the work since almost 10,000 years ago with our earliest recordings in Egyptian. So right here we have an image from the Egyptians showing a counting of clay hives and the bees. So, and then as that was the beginning, so we started with like clay type of pots or skims, and then as we moved forward in time, then we have 1851's Reverend, oh I know I'm going to butcher his name despite how many times I've said it, Reverend Lorenzo Lorraine Langstraw. It's quite a mouthful. This gentleman, we owe him everything to the modern beehive as we have it today. So the traditional box that you see with like images that that are associated with beekeepers, that's his invention. He created the box and discovered the bee space, which was 3/8 of an inch, quite tiny space. And bee space, basically, he discovered that if the space is that big, they won't build within that space. So he developed like frames and other means of creating the hive that we use today that you see beekeepers like bring in and out. Then followed that, we have 1873 with Moses Quimby, who developed the modern smoker, which is there. And then we have 2005 as the most recent invention, which I'm not sure if anyone's heard, but if you have, the flow hive system, which basically they tout as honey on tap. Basically, it's just a new way of extracting honey from the hive with minimal disturbance to the colony itself. I am planning to install a flow hive system in this hive, but probably in year 2 or 3 once we make sure Freya is doing her best. Okay. Any questions so far?
It's not a question for now, but I'm kind of curious about the flow hive system, so if we can elaborate on that at the appropriate time.
All right, definitely, yeah. Okay, so next are the types of hives. So all the hives that you see, like from the Langstroth and the flow hive, they are based off of the Langstroth idea. So the box size, using deep boxes and going from bottom to up. They're very good, friendly hives because you can get any type of Langstroth-based accessories. So flow hive system can work with this particular base Langstroth hive and vice versa. Anything from escape mat, like escape boards, there you go. Escape boards and other materials like the frame racks and things of that nature can work with each other. Naraware hives are particularly unique. They work with the natural way that hives work. So bees, they work from, if you were going to look like in a cave or in a tree, work from top to bottom. So they build their wax like that naturally. So when you work with a Naraware hive, you move everything from bottom up. So what becomes the bottom at the beginning, next becomes the next top box, and they work downwards. So it's a little bit more difficult and very back straining, dealing that you have to go from like this quite frequently.
When you say frequently, what, every few weeks,
It depends on the time of season. So if we're talking about like, not usually the first year, let's say year 2, because first year, it's kind of like when you're moving into a new house, you're trying to figure everything out. Do I put the beans here or do I put the cupboards there? Do I put the pots over there or do I put them there? So it's similar to bees. Bees work in that same manner when they're moving in. They're trying to establish themselves. So with working with the Naraware hive, as I mentioned, they work from the top going downwards. And that's what you're working with the Naraware hive. There's not many accessories in the sense of like the availability of those accessories because it's very DIY most of the time. There are places you can find it, but it's very difficult to find. Next is the top bar hive. Top bar hives they're fixed to a certain size, and you usually work either from left to right or right to left. And you can work with a frame of style where it's 1 bar here and then you have 2 bars set on the side. But mostly the most common version is that you only have the top bar version, like the top part of the frame. I do have some stickies here that I'll show later that it'll make more sense once I show you an example of a frame. But for this demonstration, because we're working only with Langstroth, that's what we're going to be focusing today. So those who are interested with Langstroth and flow hive, this will be the demonstration for you today.
Is there only 1 queen per box or 1 queen per stack, or?
There is 1 queen per colony. So basically, if you see like a whole stack, that's 1 giant colony. That's 1 queen. She's pushing out about 1,500 to 2,000 eggs per day. So yes, and she lives to about 5 to 6 years. So it's a busy little lady.
And so, because I'm very new to this, well, I don't know anything, but we do have bees on our property, and there's a red gum tree, and bees go in there and do their thing. So presumably there's a queen there, or is that an assumption that there's a queen wherever bees gather? Or?
The way that the queen will always stay in with the main body of the colony. So, for example, we have the hive over here at Community Gardens, and the queen will never leave, hopefully, on wood, will never leave from that spot. So the bees that you see that are very heavy on trees or that are on like lavender bushes or anything like that, or your red gum, they have basically spoke to the other worker bees in the colony and just basically said, hey, I found this amazing resource. You want to come and help me? And they're like, oh yeah, definitely. And then they'll just go ahead and gather a bunch of sisters and foragers and they just run off to the location. So when you see them busy like that, it's because that they found that really good resource and they're trying to grab as much of it as possible. And just remember that they also have other competitors like the native bees that are around, other European other European bees that are nearby. So it's all about nature and its competitiveness. So when you see them like that, it's because they're gathering the food and then heading out. So yeah, and they'll be going back and forth almost 100 times a day.
So would a hive attract any of those other bees that are already established around?
Actually, yes. We'll get more into it later on in the slides. But yes, it is possible for other bees to be attracted to another colony, and it could be due to the strength of the queen's pheromones. That's one, or from the nature of there being honey, and then of course honey being a valuable resource, they would also happen to go in. There's also a little bit of like quid pro quo when it happens on a like a smaller level.
Do different bee species cross and cohabitate in the same hive, or they only stick to one species or one type?
You mean if they crossbreed?
No, like, do they attract other species of bees?
Interact.
Oh, okay. They do attract other species of bees. That's where the guard bees come in, and then depending on how it's a little weird because what happens is that there's sort of like a small bribing system that happens when a foreign bee comes to a colony. So sometimes they'll go ahead and they'll bribe the guard bee, and then they'll go in and grab whatever they need and come back out. But if the queen's pheromone is strong enough, then they end up being part of the new colony. So it really depends on exactly what happens in that bribing process. There's a lot of information on YouTube that shows that how bees get somewhat coerced in that are from other colonies and end up being part of like the colony. So yeah.
We have on our property a wasp nest. I think that they do. It's like a red gum thing, but I can see heaps of wasps.
Mm-hmm.
If we put a beehive in our property, would they fight, or would the wasps kind of kill them or something? Or
It really depends on the situation. So if you see a swarm, now a proper swarm is where you see a number of bees, and I mean they're clumped together. They almost look like you know how kids play with slime? And you know how like it kind of like stays together like that? It almost looks similarly on a tree when there's a swarm. But if you see them loose where they're not clumped together and they're just, buzzing around on the tree, that's just them gathering resources. When you see a swarm, it's pretty definitive how it looks. It just looks like this giant, like huge ball of like bees just trying to stay close to each other, because the queen is inside the middle of a swarm. And that normally happens in around the springtime, sometimes till late summer, very rare in fall, and almost, hopefully, knock on wood for fellow beekeepers, never in winter. So it's pretty distinctive. When if you have like a swarm, then I would recommend to contact your local beekeepers. Most of them are prepared to do what's called a cutout, meaning that they'll go ahead, take that swarm and put it in a box. Or if you have a more extreme situation like bees being in your wall, hopefully they'll be able to handle that. But that's something that you would have to discuss with your local beekeeper. Right. But yeah. Any other questions? Yes?
Can you take a hive to a location where there are bees and get them to assimilate into that hive?
That's similar to like a swarm trap. So where I mentioned around like spring, summer to about fall, You can catch free bees that way, actually. Many beekeepers do it as a preventative measure. Should their hive, like their already established hives, decide to leave, they have boxes set out within about, I think it's about 10 meters or something like that, where they'll have boxes with a little bit of lemongrass set placed inside, and that'll get them in there. You can even do that if you're wanting to have a hive and get lucky in spring, you know? Free bees. You know? So definitely, that's a very established method of not only prevention, but being able to help with wild bees, and then you end up with your own little colony at your place, so yeah. So with the beekeeping tools, that's one of the most important things. There are your PPE, basically, when dealing with bees. You have two different types of bee suits. So there is, this is the ventilated bee suit. It has 3 layers of mesh, and I have it backwards. 3 layers of mesh that equate to a little bit over the length of a bee stinger. So basically, if a bee tries to sting you here or anywhere along this ventilated suit, with luck, you won't get stung. But of course, if you have certain parts that are closer to your skin than others, that's where you run that risk. Being a beekeeper and stings go hand in hand. It's going to happen at some point, which is why I also recommend, if you don't know that you're allergic to bees, get tested. It's very important. And we have plenty of beekeepers who are allergic to bees who carry their EpiPens and are still beekeepers and have been doing it for years, and they're still going. So they're still, if you want to be part of this hobby and you find a way to work it around to keep yourself safe, that's the way to go. Also, just to give you FYI, I have not been stung in a ventilated bee suit yet. Ravi, on the other hand, my partner, he has been stung.
I got a bit too frisky with them.
Question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to know where to buy one of those.
These, they're, all you have to do is Google ventilated bee suit, and there's 2 different versions. There's semi-ventilated, and then there's full ventilation. Each company that sells them have different sizes. Always, 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 always go bigger than you expect the sizing to go. Because that suit, though I bought it in my size, this suit, even though I think it's like about 2 or 3 times bigger than my size, as you can tell, it's like pretty. Like I said, haven't been stung, and it's comfortable because you're bending down a lot of the time. Yeah. So because of that, you have to protect your back and your knees, and you want something that will be able to work with you and not against you. This will probably be the most expensive piece next to the smoker that you'll have in your arsenal. This is definitely something you want to spend for. But if you only want to test it out because you're in a mentorship, then go for the regular polycotton version before you dedicate yourself to a ventilated suit. But it's my preference. I like it very much. I haven't been stung, and I like it.
How much are they?
This one started at $179. With inflation, I have no idea what the cost is right now, but just to give you a base.
And what's the semi?
Semi-ventilated?
Yeah, is that better or?
The semi-ventilated works where the mesh is placed in areas where you need the vents. So usually underneath the armpits. There are some here like at the leg area. And I believe they do have on the back, there's strips. Different companies make it different ways when it comes to the semi-ventilated. So that's just one example that I've seen on the internet. But there are different versions. There's jacket versions, there's pants only versions, there's a whole suit version. So it depends on your comfort and how you want to go about
I'm
it.
guessing less chance of getting bitten with the semi.
Exactly, yes.
How much of a difference does it make? Like, does it keep your lots cooler, or it's
In
pretty
the,
cool around here, right?
given the temperatures, I mean, granted, we didn't have like super, heat wave levels this season. But I would say that it definitely makes the difference between the cotton and, because I've worn both within the hottest temperatures in our summer, and I love my ventilated. I will, the only reason why I brought that one is so you guys can see it, but I haven't touched it since December. It's been in the closet. I keep it as my emergency suit, so if something happened to the ventilated one. Other than that, that's where it is, if I'm gonna be really truly honest. So after the bee suit, you have two different types of veils. You have what's called a fencing veil. So it sits like this. All right, and you normally wear this with sort of like a baseball cap to make sure that this front mesh stays away from your nose. There have been plenty of beekeepers who forget, and then it gets close because they're looking down, and then a bee takes the opportunity to get you right there on the nose. So always make sure that you wear a cap if possible when you're wearing these. Another benefit is that you have freedom of movement. You can move your head, pretty much almost everywhere. There's ventilations here on the side. And the visibility is just the same as a round one, which I'm about to show you. Being a beekeeper for the time that I have, I'm slowly moving towards a fencing one, simply because the freedom of head movement is so much better than a round one. But that's my preference. Everyone is different, and I've seen plenty of beekeepers use the round one or use the fencing. So it all depends on what you like to do. This is the round veil. So similarly to the fencing veil, you have the mesh. It only comes to about a little bit beyond your peripheral vision. And then you have a cotton backing. Some of them have elastics, not all of them do, but basically the elastic just makes sure that your head sits in the hat. Glasses. So like this. And I've been using this for quite a long while. I'm very comfortable with it, but the problem is that this zipper gets zipped to the bee suit. So when you move, the entire thing moves with you. While with the fencing one, you have more freedom of movement. So it's just a matter of time in the sense for the fabric to wear down after a while. And then there's a hole that I never see. And then the bees start getting curious. And then lo and behold, I get a bee in the veil. So it all depends. Every time that I go out or before I inspect the hive, I always check my bee suit and my bee veil. They are what protect me against the bees. Even though our ladies they're beautiful, they're just very vocal. This is what will protect you against any stings that you may worry about. But like I said, if you're going to be a beekeeper, it's just a matter of when you get stung. Not if, but when. I'm just hoping it never happens.
So how aggressive are the bees?
In the state of Victoria, as part of the biosecurity rules that you have to maintain, you have to ensure that your bees are gentle. What that means is they can be vocal, meaning they make a heck of a lot of noise at you. But when they start aggressively stinging you, unfortunately, you either have to figure out what is the main issue? Is it because they're picking a particular type of pollen? And just like how people can drink alcohol and our attitudes change really quick, same thing with bees. Depending on what they eat, is it that? Or has the queen introduced genetics that is causing the issue? If it is the queen, unfortunately, you have to dispatch the queen and introduce a new one. So you have to ensure that the hive is gentle. Now, Ravi has worked with the hive with nitrile gloves, and outside of the 2 times that has happened with singing, other times it's been just fine. They haven't gone at him. They've been vocal, and what I mean by vocal is that they sort of make this high bee sound. So the buzz, they make this collective loud buzzing after a while. So as long as they're vocal, that's fine. or they're booping you, which is when they're going at, at your face or the veil and you hear a sound.
How bad is the buzzing? Can it disturb your neighbours if you got in a suburban backyard?
I will be honest that before I became a beekeeper, I was heavily allergic to bees. Heavily allergic, where I needed an EpiPen. Only recently, before I moved to Australia, which was about 11 years ago, that I wasn't allergic anymore. Now I'm allergic to cats and dogs. But when that happened, even now it's sort of like going through a therapy in the sense, working with the bees, getting used to their sound and everything. And it can be very nerve-wracking, especially when you have what looks like to be 15 guard bees and you end up really with over 50 guard bees on you. And that's just because they're flying really fast. It's understandable, it's very nerve-wracking, and you're talking about tiny creatures that pretty much outnumber you. But it's their nature. As long as you keep a gentle set of good genetic bees, they're fine. So one particular company I can recommend is Hachi Hives. That's where we got Freya. She is awesome. Like I said, they're vocal, but they haven't aggressively, like we didn't get 20 or 50 bees coming at us stinging. We've gone vocal, but not not a heavy aggression where we would have to dispatch.
What's the name of the, what was it name again?
Hachi Hives, or HH Hives.
So when you say vocal, how long do they go vocal for?
Well, when you're in an expansion, they'll start with a small sound of buzzing, and then the longer you're there, they'll start making more noise. Think about it as you're going to your house, you have a stranger who randomly comes in, breaks in through the door, and is like, oh, I'm just gonna rummage your food. Don't worry about it. I got it. Okay. So they're gonna be vocal about it.
It's only just when you go and disturb them?
Yes.
So otherwise they're quiet?
Otherwise they're really
Okay.
quiet. Yeah, they're not. We're not talking about car level sound.
So,
No.
yeah.
We're just talking about you're right there, and they'll make that sound.
Yeah.
Yes.
How do you determine the level of aggression? Because obviously you're going to have some aggression because you're dealing with bees.
Yes.
How do you determine what level is too much?
Level of too much is when you're going there every inspection, which is usually once a week, and they're on top of you, and you see them actively pushing their abdomen to get the stinger through. That's aggression. When you see them actively trying to get at you, or they've successfully gotten 5 stings or however many stings through your suit. That's active aggression. But otherwise, sometimes, most of the time, over here, Freya, she'll have I'll have a bunch of guard bees and they're vocal and they're boop at my head. So you'll hear, you hear that sound just going like that, and that's what I call booping. And they're just being vocal and wanting to let me know, hey, I don't like you being in my house. Can you leave, please?
Good to have a bit of especially if they got a lot of predators around, they have a bit of aggression, so then the hive can.
They can. Bees, if they are hit with natural predators more often than normal, they will actually what's called abscond, which means they'll leave because the environment is not conducive to their health. So they don't think in a sense of an individual basis. Think of it as you're dealing with a full human being with, just a whole bunch of little parts that are able to come off. So they act within the best interests of the hive. And they'll sometimes do it for no reason that you can think of. When I say that we've established the Freya hive, is because we got lucky that there's plenty of food for them to receive. You have plenty of farmland just out there. There's a winery down that way. So they have plenty of resources, and there's also the creek, which provides water. And, so they have it's a good beneficial area. Always research your area before you get a hive, because the better you know your area, the more likely the bees will be okay to stay.
If they hybridize with other species of bees, does it make them more aggressive?
the queen is the only one that can introduce genetics. And when she becomes the virgin queen, when she hatches for the very first time, she'll go what's on her like her matrimony flight. So what happens is that she'll go to an area where there are drones, and they can be drones from wild, local colonies, or or whichever which way, and then she'll mate with them and then come back if she makes it back safely. And then that's how that can happen, where you got genetics, being introduced that can be aggressive. But unless you're a commercial beekeeper that is able to what is called flooding the congregation area, then you just got to roll with the dice and hope and pray that she'll be all right. But if you buy your hive from like I mentioned, from like Hachi Hives or like any other well-established beekeeper that sells sells nukes, then it's normally guaranteed that they'll have genetic like good genetics. It's kind of like going to a breeder, as long as you know who's the good breeder and that, it's well recommended, that your dog is going to be, what is on average expected for that dog. Same thing with bees, works the same way. Just a little bit faster.
So when you start off, I had this impression, I just buy a beehive, put it in where all the bees gather, got a lot of eucalypts and all the rest of it, and just learn on how to collect the honey. It doesn't work like that. It looks like what you're saying is you buy the beehive, and together with that you buy the queen bee, and then you have to wait a while before she starts producing her own bees, and that's how it's done. Is that?
Yes, that's correct. So there is always the chance of being able to capture a wild swarm. I mean, normal, everyday, like commercial beekeepers, including.
Yeah, you mentioned that before, but that's not
how.
That's not the way it normally runs.
Normally,
so you buy your beehive, of course, all the other equipment to be able to learn on what you've got to do. But you buy the beehive, you buy the queen. You only buy one queen, or just the one queen? Is that all you need, or do you need to buy?
Well, there are two practices that happen with beekeepers. There's one where they'll change out queens every year, and that's a swarm prevention method, because once the queen hits year 2, she's going to start thinking about swarming, and that just means that the hive is healthy, they have resources coming in, everything looks up, and that's the only time that a hive will swarm, when everything looks good, or that they're running out of space, which equates to all that as well. And they do that as prevention. The other thing is with genetics. Dispatch the queen. Don't like the fact that the workers are coming after me all the time. Sorry, love you. And then there's the one queen that will stay with you for like a long time, like 3 or 4 years on average. So like I mentioned earlier, a queen will live 5 to 6 years undisturbed. And eventually the bees will decide to create a new queen before she goes through sort of like a menopause type of thing. So what it all is that she's run out of collective sperm to create the new worker bees, and she'll eventually create drones. And that's how you know, okay, yeah, I'm getting too many drones. Time to say goodbye, sorry. But mostly a queen can stay with the hive. It's not usually recommended, because then you get into troubled genetics as she gets older. Personally, I'm hoping to go through a year 2 with Freya if she survives the winter. Again, knock on wood. Winter is a very questionable area for a lot of beekeepers, so we hope. And it happens that you'll get like hives just dying in the winter, and that's just the nature of it all.
What's the best temperature to keep the hive at?
Anything above 13 degrees Celsius. And now that's not really for the bees themselves, it's really for the baby bees, the brood, the larvae and the eggs. They need to maintain a temperature, I think it's about, if I remember, it's about like 25 to 30 degrees Celsius, if I remember. I remember the Fahrenheit version, which is 92 degrees Fahrenheit, but I don't know how to convert. But But that's the average temperature that the brood needs to be kept. Any colder than that and they'll start dying off. So the bees themselves, they can go ahead and they'll go, but anything lower than that, then they start clustering together and want to stay warm. Just because for the brood themselves, for the eggs.
It's
How
funny how
much
they haven't
Fahrenheit?
devised anything to cover them, anything to protect them from the cold, the frost net.
So our hive, I've shown earlier the image here with the Langstroth hive now. That hive right here is the Langstroth. The company is called Apamiang, and they developed a food-safe plastic insulated hive. And our bees just love it. Because instead of worrying about having to heat the hive and maintain that temperature, that insulation has been wonders for them, and they can spend more time foraging than they are to keeping the hive warm. It also means that the ladies are out more often, and when you do an inspection, there's less of them after you. But here, there have been so many new developments. Now you have polystyrene hives that they have a better or even equal to insulation rating. Some wooden hives have taken on insulation as well. Vino Farm is one of the YouTubers that I personally enjoy, that even though he's not Australian, he's an American beekeeper, and he's developed this insulated wooden hive that he's been using it for I think it's 2-3 years now, and he hasn't had any dead outs. So that's really good for him. And he has 15 to 20 hives. So he's doing really well.
What temperature in Fahrenheit was it?
It was 92.
33 degrees Celsius.
33 degrees Celsius. There you go.
So where's the guy that you see on YouTube? What state is he in?
He's in Michigan, if I remember correctly. So he's pretty up north. So their winters are pretty harsh. So that's the reason for the insulation. But it benefits him in the summer because just like a house, when you put in insulation, keeps you warm in the winter, cool in the summer. So yeah. So far our hive's been doing awesome, and they've been out and about, and we didn't expect them to produce honey, and they ended up producing honey, which at the end I have a little bit to share with everybody. So,
You already got honey.
yes, it doesn't happen normally. I will say it. It does not happen normally in your first season. Not normally. This has been just a big surprise. It was just something that we found that when we went in for an inspection, and they were like, "Yeah, we have extra." So you can be surprised. There will be some beekeepers, even on YouTube, who will say that you can get honey from your first year hive, but it's very personal, individual basis. They're very few and far in between. It's not that it can't happen, it's just it's more of a rarity.
You don't get too excited. We only got 3 bottles.
Yeah.
Normally you can pull about 30 kilos. We probably got about less than a kilo. So
All right. So I mentioned earlier about the different legislations. Like I mentioned, the code of practice. So you have 3 main things that you have to keep in mind of when you're registering as a beekeeper. 1, which is very important, the beekeeper registration. This helps with the Department of Agriculture, and if any type of pests or diseases which can put your hive in danger, they will notify you ASAP. So the situation with varroa mite that's happening in New South Wales, I'd imagine that all those beekeepers that have been registered, they'll be getting emails about any type of expansions or any tests that they have to do. And the best thing with the registration also is that they have a online diary form. So that way, if something should happen and they need to do an inspection, they will come out. They'll come out and check your hives. It's very important to ensure that you maintain your registration. Registration is free for up to 5 hives. Any more than that, then you're considered commercial. And then you have to pay an annual fee. But depending on how you feel when you start getting into it, that would be up to your methods in becoming a commercial.
Sorry, asking too many questions. So is that from each property? So say, for example, you've got 4 properties. Is it per property or per person?
Per person. So right now we have just the Freya hive registered over here, and I'm not planning to expand further than that because my purpose in becoming a beekeeper is more on education than the honey or anything else that comes out from it. That's my main thing. Other people have different reasons. Some people want a beehive because they want their vegetables or fruits or flowers to flourish and grow bigger, you know, for the season that they'll harvest. So bees are beneficial for that. You could be having bees because you have a very large set of land and you want to provide help. There are many different reasons for each beekeeper why they want to be a beekeeper. You could be a beekeeper because you want to make lipstick. Make one of those organic lipsticks that, you know, Burt's Bees is famous for. You know? So there's a lot of different things for that. The next is the Apiary Code of Practice. Now, each of these QR codes you can scan when at the end of the class or anything, you can scan the QR code here to have a copy of the slide, and you'll have access to all these links and stuff that you can check later. Apiary Code of Practice also, they have a book and the biosecurity book as well. So this is last year's. I have to order this year's. But they come out with new legislations and new rules that you have to keep out, or sometimes they refresh the old ones and, you know, let you know. And they'll let you know of like pests, different types of like things that are going on with like varroa or anything like that. How to put up signage for like, you know, your bees and stuff like that. So okay. And it's also free to download on their website. So, you know, you pay for the booklet, but the information is absolutely free on their site. The last one is the Biosecurity Code, so that's that book as well. And it's the same thing, basically maintaining a clean hive, making sure that your bees are gentle. Let me see what else. Making sure that they have like a water source. So bees are classified as a livestock here in the state of Victoria. So because of that, you have to be well informed of those legislations. No different than if you were going to have a cow or sheep or chickens. And it's slightly different with each counciled area. So Hume Council you don't need a permit in this area to have a hive. But if you move outside of the Hume Council area, then you would have to find out. Some councils are like, nope, you can't have a hive here at all. I don't care what reason you give me, you can't. And there are some council areas where they're like, oh yeah, that's totally fine. Just fill out this paper and there you go. Give us $10 and you're fine. Mm-hmm. So it really depends on like which areas that you're going to be at. So make sure that you always research first before you put in the hive. Because the last thing you need is a neighbor contacting council. And then council goes, hey, this hive, have you registered? And you're like, I was supposed to register? You know? And then they can easily just say, no, you got to get rid of the hive, and that's it. So always make sure you do your due diligence in researching your area before you put it in. All right, next. I'm just going to glance through this really quick. It is very important to know. So the bee life cycle. On average, it takes about 24 days for the longest, and that's for drones. Drones take the longest out of any other bee. So the three castes, there's the queen, there's the worker, and there are drones. There's only one queen in an entire hive, and she takes the shortest amount of time, going at 16 days on average. Becomes important knowledge to know when springtime is coming on to do swarm prevention. Next is the worker. The workers basically are 95% of the colony. So you're dealing with a whole bunch of ladies. And they take on average 21 days to hatch. So approximately you're looking like every month you're coming up with a new generation of ladies working. And it's set sort of like in a, what's it called? Like a trickle down type of method. You'll notice when you have your hive, you'll see eggs and then they'll get capped. And then you'll see another area that's just eggs. And then they'll just work in batches, like she'll work in batches across. And the last one are the drones with the gentlemen. The workers do everything. Forage, feed, clean the hive, guard, take care of dead bees. They do everything like that. Drones, unfortunately, are the rest of the 4 or 5% of the hive, and they're in charge of spreading genetics, and that's it. They live on average to about 6 months, but unfortunately, the way that most colonies go, they'll kick them out before they reach their 6 months. Just because they only eat and provide genetics, and that's about it. So here is a closer image of their size. So drones are usually much stubby. The way you can recognize a drone is I think of it as aviator glasses, that they're wearing giant aviator glasses. And that's how you can identify between them and the rest. Queen is she stands out with practice. She has a very long body. Abdomen is the longest. Drones don't have stingers. Queens and workers do. And she works like as a ninja pretty much. I always have a hard time identifying the queen because usually she ninjas her way across frames like no one else's business. But she's meant to push everyone else out of the way while she's doing her work.
How would the size of a wasp compare to these to the bees?
Wasps are generally bigger than bees. Generally bigger. They're also a predator to bees. So there are certain certain wasps out there that will like kill bees, such as the Japanese murder hornet which is an orange and black, very large hornet. And basically they can kill bees, eat the larvae, eat the honey, and just outright destroy them. Wasps and bees are just, they're enemies towards each other. They don't deal with it. But bees do have a great sense of defense, where should a wasp enter a hive, they do one of two methods. They either wait for it to enter the hive and then come at it all together, or they'll just outright ball them, move their wing muscles as fast as they can, and boil the hornet or wasp alive. And that's how they fight against such large predators. So yeah, well, in comparison to their own little bodies. So yeah, they're very adaptive. We are talking an invasive species here in Australia. Just to lay it blank, it is invasive. The native Australian bee, the stingless bee, unfortunately, and other bees, don't produce the same amount of honey as the European bee does. So that is one of the main reasons why it's here in that sense. So, but they do really well. They're very strong. There's a lot of research going back and forth on the sustainability between natives and the introduced species. But the data hasn't been fully established, it hasn't been peer reviewed and everything, so it's still in talks. Yes?
If you're not in demand for that much honey and you wanted to keep it sort of native, could you buy the native one as well?
You could buy native honey. You're mostly going to find it up in the north, unless you mean bees. You mean the bees themselves.
Yeah.
Ravi, you take that? You've done your research?
Native bees don't exist this area. The furthest south you can go is Sydney. It's just too cold for them.
Wow, right.
What's the stingless ones?
Stingless native bees that can produce some honey. You've got plenty of native bees around here in Victoria, but they're solitary. They don't make hives. They tend to, I don't know if you've seen those giant bee hotels, which are just a big bunch of hollow sticks. They live in those things.
Oh, right.
We've got a lot of teddy bear bees around this area, Sunbury.
So if those type of bees don't, Ravi had said, don't produce a hive situation where you can collect honey or anything. You can provide an environment so that way there are more native bees. This is not the only way to support the bee situation. You can support native bees by providing those bee type hotels using the bamboo sticks and things like that, and creating those hotels. That would be promoting the natives and being able to still have pollinators going on, because bees are not the only way. I definitely recommend that if you don't want to go through, the whole buying a Langstroth hive, buying the bees, buying equipment. It is the next best thing that you can do to help the bee community.
Is there anywhere you go to find it? Sorry. Is there anywhere you go to find how to build one of these?
Oh yeah, you can. There's plenty of internet resources for buying like the like making bee hotels.
Yeah.
Most of the bee hotels provided by Bunnings, unfortunately, they're a little bit too small for like what the average size of the solitary natives are. So it's recommended that you build, your own, and it's very easy. You can use it out of scrap wood. Some people have gone fancy and used acrylic. Like acrylic plastic stuff and whatnot. So yeah, you can do it that way very easily.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, can you do both? Can you do this one and the natural bees in one area?
Yeah, definitely. You can have both natives and like European bees in the same area. They're not going to go after each other. Well, I shouldn't say that because like nature is very unpredictable. Normally, I'm going to say it's not going to cause a situation. Next. So I was mentioning earlier about what a swarm looks like. I don't know if you can see it very well here, but they're like clumped together in sort of like on average a basketball size. So you see how they're clumped here and they're like that? That's how you know if there's like a swarm going on. And that's when you would have to contact your local like beekeeper to gather them up if you want them off the property or relocated. Other time, if you see them, just on the trees, they're just foraging and doing what bees normally do. Colonies are usually available here in Victoria from early spring to about February-ish, give or take. And that's because the change of temperatures and the amount of time for them to establish themselves as the season progresses gets shorter and shorter, mostly due to daylight. Nucleus or nukes are the average that you can get for an individual beekeeper basis. Packages are usually available for like commercial basis, and that's basically a box with full of bees, 10,000 give or take, and a mated queen, a guaranteed mated queen. Let me reiterate that because I know there have been some beekeepers that have been unfortunate. So just remember that if you do purchase whether a nuke or if you're able to get a package, you are guaranteed a mated queen. All right. If the queen is not producing, you can definitely go back to the beekeeper and be like, hey, she's not making anything. So yeah. Nukes and I mentioned the number. And then swarms, you can get bees through swarms, but as I said, it's much harder to get. Yes, it's free, but you also run the risk of, are they bringing pests? Are they bringing diseases? How big is it? Would they be able to survive or establish themselves, or are they just too small? On average, the smallest that I've heard is about the size of a palm. And usually bees, like swarms about that big, don't normally make it. You really have to get a nuke, be on top of them, make sure that you feed them, and it may or may not really be worth it. A commercial beekeeper would have a higher chance of maybe bringing up that hive to that colony to where they need to be healthy than an individual beekeeper. Now I'm just saying along the lines of the availability of medicines or anything like that would be needed. So it's just better to go ahead with a nuke because you know that they are healthy and that they're coming from a reputable resource.
Can I ask you something? When they swarm, they have their own new queen?
Yes.
And if you want to feed them, what do you feed them with?
Once you get the swarm in your Langstroth box or whatever style of hive that you're going for, you feed them with 1-to-1 sugar water. With the proviso that it depends on what season that you got this. If it's spring going into summer and sometimes around late summer, 1-to-1 sugar water. If it's sort of like now where we're going into winter, then you go 2-to-1, or you can go straight into what's called bee fondant. And bee fondant is sort of it's just like regular fondant for cakes, except it's been infused with minerals and other stuff that would help the bees out. So for example, Freya Hive, even though we know that she's doing really well, we still purchased bee fondant just in case, rather to be safe than, not safe. Yeah. So yeah, so 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 sugar water.
2 sugar, 1 water.
Yes. And it's really easy to do. You just use regular hot water, add your sugar, mix it up, and then your hands once you get everything sticky and whatnot, you know you've done the right thing. If your water is boiling, you've gone too far.
And then you have to leave it on a surface or like something that is not raw.
I normally put it in our feeders. Some people put it in jars and then perforate the jars and just feed that directly to the bees. It depends on the method that you want to go for. So there are like different ones. So I mentioned the jar, perforate the jar, flip it upside down. That's one way to feed the bees. The other way is that you buy specific bee feeders, which our hive came with. So with Apame Hive, it came with a lot of accessories, feeders, queen excluder, everything that you need. Very beginner friendly. I use it because I love the installation. And I'm recommending them because they're great. Easy to clean too when it comes to cleaning. Then with, that's the other way. The other way is sort of like a front entrance method, and that's not really recommended because it can induce robbing. And robbing is basically foreign bees coming in because they smell the sweetness and they start fighting each other. We've been lucky that that hasn't happened to Freya, and hopefully doesn't. But yeah.
Sorry, what type of sugar?
Only regular white sugar, not brown sugar, not castor sugar. You want regular white sugar. Castor sugar is used for testing for pests with varroa, which is what this, and you can see a little bit of like castor sugar in there because we recently did like a testing, which Freya did really well. She got a negative, so which is good. And the brown sugar, which contains like molasses and white sugar, messes with the bees' guts, and they can end up getting sick. So brown sugar is a big no-no. Stick with white sugar and only castor for testing. That's it. All right. So this is the ins and outs of a Langstroth hive. Right here we have pictures of the hive that's just back there. Starting from the bottom is our bee stand, and that comes in different ways. This is just one example. We have the bottom board, which is where the bees land, and it's funny as hell when you start watching them flying because they're good at taking off, they're not so good at landing. So it's really fun. There's a lot of slow motion videos showing how bees land, and it's sort of like a tuck and roll situation. Then you got the deep, this has deep super, which you can buy deep supers, but basically any type of deep box is where the brood, the queen, and when I mean brood, I mean that's the mixture of like the eggs, the larva, pupa, and most of like the nurse bees generally stay in this area. It's where you're going to also do the main part of your inspections if you keep a single brood box management situation, which is what we do here for Freya. It's just generally easier when you only have one box rather than, for example, 2 or 3 boxes to go through. Boxes come in 2 different sizes. You have 8 frames and 10 frames. And you also have several categories of that where you have mediums, manlies, and ideals, and much more. Then next you have queen excluder, which name pretty is, keeps the queen out. It has earned itself the nickname sometimes as honey excluder. Just because unfortunately with some beekeepers, the workers don't go up to the box through the excluder, or that they're afraid to go through it. So they'll start putting honey in the brood box or deep box area, and don't want that. It takes a little training, so to speak, to get them to move up to the top box. Then you have your supers, and this is where the gold comes from. This is where all this comes from. This is We're the sweet, sweet goodness of golden liquid, you know? Or liquid gold, sorry. So the honey supers are mainly where all the honey is going to be at, where you're mainly going to get your honey from. When you have this type of situation, you can decide whether one of the supers is just for the bees and then the other one is for yourself, or if you're working single box management, you ensure that the deep box has at least 4 frames worth of deep framed honey, meaning there's nothing else. There's only honey in those 4 frames. And then these become all yours for you to take at the end of, like near the end of the season. Then you have the either hive mat or inner cover, depending on your style. And then the outer cover, which can be telescopic, or there's sort of like a house peak version, and I forgot the name for that one, but it looks like a house. The flow hive is known for this sort of peak type design. And it's just a matter of preference, you know, and your area and how well you know your area. Okay, spring inspections. Spring, fall, winter inspections differ on what you're going to look for. Spring, you're looking for queen cells, which look like peanuts. Literally peanuts, like they'll poke out of the frame looking like a giant peanut. And that's how you know that you have a swarming situation happen. And you have less than 16 days, well, not 16 days, by the time it gets to that point, you have like maybe 4 or 5 days to do something about it. So which usually means that you have to split the hive artificially and create a new hive, or you dispatch the old queen and you let them continue with the queens that they're making. Yes?
Oh, sorry, stupid question.
There's no such thing as
swarming.
a swarming.
So like, is that a bad thing? Is it?
No, in fact, I think it's called an oxymoron when it means 2 different things, right? I don't know. I'm really bad at that part about that type of word. But basically, swarms are both good and bad. Good because it represents that the hive is healthy, there's resources, there's honey, new workers are coming out, everything's up and up. It's like the stock market. You're getting all that cash, everything's coming in, right? Bad because as a beekeeper, when it's time for them to actually swarm, they take half of the work, half of everything with them out into the world. Hopefully you can catch them. They usually leave at about like 10 or 20 meters away from the original location, and then you have about a half hour to an hour before they go off into the world, and then
Gone.
that's it, they're gone. So when the hive that's left over is the old queen and then half of the workforce, and that slows up honey production. So normally beekeepers, especially commercial beekeepers, they're on top of it in the spring and they start knocking down those queen cells left and right if they can do it. Unless the queen is old, then that's a different situation. Then they have to determine, is it worth keeping it or is it not?
How close can you have 2 colonies? Like, could you keep
Oh,
the same
right next to
colony?
each other.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, you could put your original hive here, and then you have your new split just right next to each other, and they could be both facing the same direction. The only thing I recommend is that you put some kind of color that gives them like a landmark to say, oh, this is my hood here. Because like I said, they can be influenced to go into each other's hives. So yeah. So as long as you have some kind of difference. So like I mentioned, this information is in the PDF, and I'll send those out to you as well. So we'll just move a little bit forward to pests and diseases. Pests and disease control is very important. We actually had a situation with Freya where she experienced what's called chalk brood. Chalk brood is sort of the equivalent of a human cold. But that, we also know that if the cold is serious enough, it can actually cause someone to pass on sometimes. We were lucky enough that we caught it early, and basically we were able to mitigate it, and that's why Freya is still with us today. So chalk brood is basically that the temperatures went from like 30 all the way down to like 18 or 17. There was a dramatic temperature change, and the actual baby bees just didn't survive. So that's why it's also a reportable disease, so you have to report it, and we had to do that. We got lucky enough that an inspector didn't come in, but the department did send important information with steps on how to help with improving the situation with the hive, and a number and an email with an inspector that we can contact directly should any further situation arise. We did the steps, and we were really lucky that Freya, she's okay and alive and well, and so is her brood. So that's why I was mentioning it's important to register. That information can be very important in saving your hive.
How do you monitor the temperature in the hive?
There's actually a number of different types of like technologies that have come out. There's one called Broodminder. It does work with like a Wi-Fi connection, and there are some of them that they have the thermometer attached directly into the hive itself. You know, so it's all available to like, you know, finagle, and there are plenty of DIYs, like especially on YouTube, on like how to put in one. I've been thinking of getting sort of like a scale for the hive, so that way instead of trying to, you know, lift the hive up to find out if it's heavy or not, you know, I can know exactly what's going on. Other diseases, you know, Varroa is one that I've mentioned. There's brawler fly, larva moth. There's quite a number of different types of pests that bees deal with. Most of them count on the fact that as long as you have a strong hive, like a strong colony with good numbers, it usually keeps the rest out. Just like with the human body, you know, as long as you eat well, exercise, you know, do what you need to do, you know, you're generally going to be okay. Same situation. Clean place, good numbers, good feed, that'll be fine. So yeah. But there's more information here on the beaware.org, and they offer a free course that you can earn a certificate for, which is recognized by the Department of Agriculture. In fact, those that have done the course have been enlisted to go to New South Wales to help with the Varroa mite situation over there. So I've taken the course, I've done it. It's an annual course that you have to do because information changes all the time. And like I said, it's free. This is just a list of readings that I personally recommend. So there's Backyard Bees, and there's also the Australian Beekeeping Manual. These are your bestest friends. This one's good because it's more tailored to, like, you know, if you're having a hive in the backyard. This one's for anybody, commercial, pro, beginner, and it has all the information. And the recent chapter has an explicit flow hive chapter. So if you're planning to get the flow hive, I recommend this book. Another one is and I know it has a very silly title, but I highly recommend it, is Beekeeping for Dummies. It has 3 editions, that book, and though it's mainly based in the United States, the information is the same across no matter which way you go. The way you maintain your hive and everything. Just keep in mind the fact that they're more US based and legislations here could be different. So yeah.